Tori O'Neal, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing swimmingly. We finally made it here. I'm sorry I got here late, but we're surviving. We're going to have a conversation.
Perfect.
Perfect. Listen, you are a rancher in the salmon area, correct?
Yes, so I'm actually from the Pissimiroy Valley in between Salmon and Chalice. I would be the fourth generation of my family to ranch there, and we've always raised cow calf cattle, and now I'm kind of trying to do more of the pasture to plate. But that's my background. I had a little bit of a detour. I'm not your classic egg kid. I always get razzed a little bit because I went to Boise State. I'm not a U of
Uh,
I. And that's an oddity in agriculture in Idaho. But I went to Boise State, majored in political science, worked with the cattle association for a little bit while there, and then I
oh.
took a total left turn. I did the opposite of what most Idahoans expect. I went from Idaho to California.
That's crazy. What did you, for what purpose?
Like all very brilliant early 20-year-olds, I decided to move down there with my boyfriend at the time. He was a mechanical engineer, so I moved down to beautiful Bakersfield, California.
Beautiful Bakersfield. Well, God bless you. How did that go?
Yeah, it was interesting. So I took a bit of a left turn, not much for lots of egg, but no politics, and I ended up working for a food company. So I was wanting to get back to food. I moved to California, didn't have any plan except for I knew I wanted to come back to Idaho. I loved working in food. At the time, this is, around 2013, 2014. It's when pasture to plate and really knowing where your food comes from and being hands-on was really starting to take off with folks.
Mm,
And I'm down there and I'm working with folks, and I had applied for an internship job at Bolt House Farms,
mm.
hoping, maybe I'd get some interview experience while I was looking for a better job. And I ended up working in their research and development department because I loved food, I loved ingredients, and with political science, I was pretty good at statistics and polling for consumer research. And so I'm working with those folks, and it's a group of people who we love food, we love where food comes from.
Sure.
And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, this is perfect because I'm thinking about in Idaho how we raise our cattle and how my neighbors and my dad, what we do with our cattle is so in line with what all these folks say they want. And really understanding that, for most people, it isn't that they have an anti view of any of the agriculture we do. It's that they didn't know they didn't know anybody. And so that kind of inspired a passion in me. And then after about 8 years down there, and working kind of in corporate food, I went from fiance to not fiance, but also not husband, and I moved back to Idaho. And that was kind of my turning point of coming home. It was one of those moments that I was like, oh, okay, well, this is, feels terrible, but in hindsight was kind of where I needed to be. And from there, I was lucky enough to move back into a little bit of ranching, and I was still working in the food industry for Basic American Foods when I moved back to Idaho. And then in 2020, my dad was diagnosed with cancer, and we
Oh,
lost him
I'm
three
sorry.
months later. And that was tough, but the nice part was I was back and I really was dedicated that, hey, we're going to take this over and move into it. And so I'm back here, and that's why I wanted to chat with you today when offered the chance, because I really do think that passion for Idaho and, a bunch of folks that know where their food come from, and even folks who are not in agriculture, I think in Idaho, the reason we're here is we're a big natural resource state. We have so many amazing opportunities to really connect with our state and how we can grow the food that we eat, and then all those small communities and that thing that really makes Idaho Idaho, which I didn't realize until I moved back from California how friendly Idahoans actually are. I had assumed we were pretty friendly, but when I moved back and it went from people just saying, hey, welcome, and can we help? It was not just a cursory, can we help? It's, hey, can we get you completely moved into your new house or help you with anything? And
Yeah, man, it is different. It's really cool that you had that experience. It sounds like it was not without its difficulties, but it is like people should experience it,
hmm
and see why. I had a Joey Bingham, who I really enjoy. He's a dairy guy over in in Gooding, and he's got like 500 head of cattle. He actually has a really cool vertical integration. So he started with just the cattle, and then he built a USDA processing plant, and then he had a point to sale. So he owns the entire chain all the way up. And by the way, his wild huckleberry milkshakes are off the hook.
Those sound amazing.
They're so, we could go right now. Like, and I would eat too. They're really good. But again, cool guy. He grew up in dairy and then came to the Boise area and was working in respiratory therapy, and just was like, dude, I don't like this. Like this, it doesn't feel right. And again, successful, doing well, but decided to move back home and just fire up, his own dairy operation. And that's what he's done. And it's, I think it's so cool that he's had that perspective and found it. The criticism I have of people that don't go places like myself. So I was born and raised in the same 5-mile radius my entire life, and only moved when I finally moved to Idaho when I was 39. You know what? I had this gigantic criticism towards the end of my time there, which is like, you know what? My friends are here because I'm here. And this was the number one thing. They're like, who do you know in Idaho? I was like, oh, I know a bunch of people. I've just never met them. It was like, well, what are you going to do? I'm like, I have the best job ever waiting for me in Idaho. I just don't know what it is. And you go through this process of, wait, I'm only here, not because this is the best place to live, not because they're the best people, not because I've tried all these different things and this is the best tasting cereal ever. I am here because that's where I've always been. My friends are here because that's where I've always been. My job is here because that's where I've always worked. I haven't stress tested my life to figure out what the best life is. And I figured that out at like 38, 39. And it was like, whoa, man, like that's not the right way to be in the world.
Yeah, I that resonates with me, and it's funny because there is this dynamic, I think, especially in rural Idaho and these small towns, which is most of Idaho.
Right.
You get this perspective, or at least my generation of growing up in my teens. If you actually want to make money ranching, you better go find it somewhere else and then come back and ranch. And I was really fortunate enough to still channel that that's what I wanted to do and come back, and that I could make that successful. And that there was a whole community of folks that could support something that would sustain that. And I know your education is one of the things that you really like to focus on. And I think it's exciting we're starting to come around now in rural Idaho to the idea that we can get our youth out to be exposed to what they want in the world. They can get that experience to know
Right.
that drive to come home if they want to is there. But get them some experience and then tell them, hey, you can come back home. And such a big part of that I will really credit to this Treasure Valley area for folks like myself or anyone in startup dairies and meat this is such a cool area if you're trying new things or you're a smaller producer, because so many folks that live here want to know the story behind their food. They want to know that the person that was raising it was invested in the soil. And there's been a beautiful story to tell for a long time, and now I think there's actually folks who are willing to support that and really put a lot of value into where their food comes from. And it's so cool that we can grow it within this state and deliver it to people that are also in this state.
Yeah. And to your point, I didn't really know ag people or the ag industry before I moved here. And one of the first people I met was this guy, Farmer Dan. I was like, Dan's a farmer over, in a community I used to live in, and he had a CSA, community sponsored agriculture, and it was great and everything. And it was like, there's really good food. You can go down. Dan was super cool. And I was like, hey, come on. He was one of my first big guests. It was like episode 12 or something. I got Farmer Dan. I was like, yes. Because everybody knew him. And again, super cool guy. He became a good friend of mine, but it was one of the first people that I got introduced to, one that was an ag. And he was like, well, yeah, after I think he got a master's in business or something. I'm like, wait, you have advanced degrees? He's like, yeah, I like farming. I'm like, this is not computing with me. And again, the preconceived notions about who the people are producing your food. Same thing with Brad McIntyre. I was talking to him, I've had him on the show several times. And I'm like, how did you get into this? He's like, well, after college, I was doing blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, you went to college too? He's like, yeah. And almost all of the ag people I know left and got, pursued education and other things, and then came back to ag. And it changed my perspective of, oh, these are not people that just fell into this just happenstance or because they married into it or they were born into it. And those things may have happened, but they actually selected it as the thing that they really wanted to do. They're like, this is the lifestyle that I want to engage in. And it is, yeah, I think it is important to maintain that option. I was actually just talking to a guy, Mitchell Searle, right before this one, and about the difficulty with becoming an ag person as a young person. He was like, look, you want acreage? Like acres in, let's say, the Magic Valley or something, or wherever he's from. He's like, it's like $20,000 per acre, right? And
Yeah.
so if you want a 1,000 acre plot, which is not that much if you're growing things, if you want 1,000 acres, it's going to cost you roughly $20 million. Now, we actually worked out on potatoes. Okay, so the 100 weight price of potato is something like you break even at $8, right? So let's say you get $10 for 100 pounds of potatoes. Okay, and you're pushing, let's say, 30,000 pounds per acre out of the ground. Okay, you make $600 per acre. That because the delta is $2 per acre, or excuse me, $2 per hundredweight, and you get 30,000 of them. So again, $600 per acre. You have to do 1,000 acres if you're going to make $60,000 of profit. And that's if you have the water rights, because potatoes are a really thirsty crop and you need at least 2 acre feet of water, right? It's like you work out all of these things. It's like, how do people get going in this? And his position was, at this point, you really have to be born into it or marry into it, because the burden and capital outlay for a starting off farmer is so astronomical.
Yeah, and I think that that's why it's, for me, it's a conversation we need to have, and I think that it's coming to the forefront, is we've already lost a massive amount of our agricultural land. And like you said, to actually buy into it's so difficult. And there's a lot of other conversations we could have about the balance between accommodating our growing population and keeping agriculture. But for me, it really comes down to the moral compass and roots of our state, and preserving that way of life and that connection to the land is very critical. And I think if we don't start paying attention to the fact that we need to balance our growth with supporting our local agriculture and keeping those smaller family farms running. And I would love to see an avenue to bring in folks who say, hey, I've never farmed, I don't have generational land. Trying to connect those with the folks who say, I don't want to see this go, but there's nobody to farm it. And these are some issues that we really need to bring about. And I'm part of a sustainable grass-fed co-op called Desert Mountain, and so we use the word sustainable a lot because it's become the buzzword in regenerative.
Sure.
But it's funny because sustainable to our customer, I think most folks think it's about your practices in the soil and the land, which it is. But for us, when we pick sustainable for a co-op, the reason we focus on it is it's also economic sustainability. When you are in agriculture, like you just laid out, for your average potato farmer, and the numbers that you laid out, just to make $60,000, you're investing so much into land. You can't afford to buy new land. Right now, you probably couldn't even afford to dig your potatoes. It was probably better to leave them in the ground and see it go.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like we were chatting about that exact thing, the risk, because then you obviously have to have crop rotation and cross, essentially a hedge fund of crop growth, right? And at this point, it's like you can't even pay people to get rid of the potatoes. Like
No.
you could give them away for free, and you're going to argue about who's going to get them there.
Yeah, yeah, and so that's where, when we think about sustainability as a co-op, and the reason we formed a co-op was kind of the economic sustainability of our operations, and anyone who's interested in kind of the same credo we are of preserving the soil and preserving, a future land that's still a working land. And then it feeds into, we're in these small communities. A lot of these communities were predicated on those farms and those ranches, and when those are gone, we're beautiful little service locations, but you lose that tie to the soil and the ground and the folks that are really invested in that. And I think that it can be easy to paint it as that beautiful Yellowstone-esque landscape that's outside of the Treasure Valley, but we're really in this together, because preserving, that tie to the ground, I think, is what is so cool about most Idahoans, because you can go out to any farmer and rancher and ask them why they do what they do. And they're going to tell you, I want this for generations. If I've been here, I'm the fourth generation, I want to see either my nephews take it over, or like you said, if somebody was interested and they want to keep it going, keep it going. But that said, I could probably talk to most folks, a California transplant that's here, and what do you love about Idaho? What would your answer be?
What do I love about Idaho? Which sector of Idaho would you like me to start in? I
Uh,
like
yeah.
recreational, law enforcement,
Let's
politics.
let's
I
go with
mean,
your recreational. What are the top things you like about this
I
state?
have a four-wheeler track in my backyard. So my
Okay.
my 9-year-old, when he turns 9, we buy this used four-wheeler for him because he's like way into motorsports. He's gonna be walking up a mountainside with like an elk quarter in
Uh-huh.
like 10 years. That's just who he is.
Yes.
And we have a track in the backyard now because I was able to purchase like a little hobby farm.
Yeah.
And we time it down to a hundredth of a second. We have like track records. We got little jumps. We got all these things. That's phenomenal, right? I have a 1,200 square foot shop slash barn. I'm setting up an archery range in there this winter. So, like, and then all of that. So it's essentially training my boys to have the capacity to move out into the broader world of like, no, no, no. Now we're going out into the BLM on the four wheeler that you have been practicing on for months on our property. So that's kind of the idea this summer of being able to take them out and again, I have 3 boys, so they're monsters, and I'm gonna have to
Yeah.
acquire some more equipment. But yeah, like just that alone, being able to get them connected to recreation in California is very odd because everything is really expensive there. The things that are free aren't actually free because the thing they take the most is time,
Hmm.
right? So you have beautiful areas that people do not engage in because they're working 6 and 7 days a week. You also have a grand conflict with kind of like hacky, what I would consider hacky conservation versus like conservation with a purpose.
Hmm.
So that, you might have an area that's great to go cycling, but one, you don't have the time to go cycling, and two, people are arguing about shutting down the single tracks.
Yeah.
So they're, so you have those problems, and again, just accessibility becomes a real thing
Yeah.
where the average person just doesn't have the time to go and take advantage of it.
Yeah, and so to me, that's, what I'm hearing is a lot of that access to our open and
Yeah,
public
yeah, yeah.
lands and those open lands. And so I really think wherever we land in this discussion, because, we need to accommodate the people, our population is growing, but we have that shared value.
Yeah.
Idahoans like access to our public land. We like being stewards of that land. We don't want to see the elk go away. We want to have healthy soil. We want to have forests that can withstand forest fires. And I think that's kind of the critical role that keeping these small operations alive and keeping that flow between more major areas and our rural areas is important because it's fascinating to me. After my dad passed away, I was lucky enough I had basically a lot of dads. That's what my inheritance was. Is my dad had so many good friends that helped me, and one is the most cowboy man you will ever meet, but you would expect him to give you the most conservative, I do what I want, but he has become the most conservation minded man because he acknowledges the reason we live out here and we live a lifestyle in agriculture and running cattle on our private ground and on the forest is we want to see elk. We want to maintain those open corridors for our elk and deer. The same thing that drives you to get out there, and hopefully your son will be packing an elk quarter out of some really, really rank country one day.
Yeah.
And then, we want to leave just maybe another little swath of that hay field or that grain field on the corner so we can see the huns and the sage grouse come back. I mean, I think that's the coolest thing. And you mentioned conservation without real purpose or forethought.
Yeah, right.
And
Conservation for conservation's
yeah,
sake.
and I think that's something Idaho does in an excellent fashion. And like I said, I'm coming right off the Idaho Association of Soil Conservation Districts meeting. And I find it so refreshing every time I meet with all of the board elected supervisors and district employees that come in because they're dotted all over Idaho. Ada District has one that's, going to be working more in that space of working with small landowners, but you've got folks that are all the way down to Tiny Chalice or Yellowstone. And the cool thing with that is we have a structure for doing conservation that is so minded to the landowner, so minded to the community, and so reflective of where it's happening. And I think that that's something that we definitely want to maintain because I think that was perfect is if you're doing conservation, you need to know why you're doing it,
Yes.
who's using that land, and what the inputs are, because you don't want to do a conservation project that maybe it benefits the landowner, but it hurts the anadromous fish population and it prohibits somebody from going fly fishing further down the river. Like, we have a holistic system. We have all of these resources, and I really think that's the huge value of kind of that Idaho credo of we each have that responsibility to really take care of the natural resources we have. And, you know, I think it's kind of a pride I take forward that that's something I was raised with is this land is mine for a limited time in the grand scope of things. So if I'm not taking care of it in those conservation decisions that I'm making with it hamstring the next generation, that is on me.
Okay. I so appreciate that. I was just talking to a friend this morning. He's very romantic about the idea of ranching somewhere at some point, and he's has an MBA and he's got 4 kids and doesn't live anywhere where he could start ranching. But his dream is to essentially have like a coastal ranch in California and like
Yes.
run cattle all around, right? I mean, how great would that be? Like,
The first time my dad came to visit me in Bakersfield, of course, we had to take him outside of Bakersfield.
sure.
And
Like immediately.
Yeah, we drove past Santa Margarita Ranch in January, rolling green hills, and then you come over and look into Morro Bay and see the ocean. And my dad's first words were, I could calve here in January.
Yeah, yes. Okay, now, mind you, I was born and raised in the SF Bay Area. Okay, they have huge, like beautiful rolling hills, like north of the Golden Gate Bridge, these incredible hills and coastal areas. And they just terminated a dump truck of grazing leases, like all of them. They're like, no, we're going to get this back to like its natural state. It was like, wait, guys. Okay, first off, like some of these dairies and whatnot have been here for like 50, 60 years, like multi-generation operations that are gigantic operations. People in this area enjoy the products. Like I remember when I was in college, even finding out there's this place called Neiman Ranch that had like incredible, big fan, right? Dude, this is how impressionable I was in college. This is really embarrassing. I met this guy, Mo. It was summer. Okay, so Matt's like wandering down across campus. I was taking summer school, and there's this guy doing some kind of like tights. She's like, I don't know what he was doing. Anyway, and he like struck up a conversation. There's a walking by, I end up talking to him, and he opens his thermos and he like takes a bite of this meat. And I'm like, that's raw meat? I was like, what are you eating there, sir? And he was like 25. And he was like, oh, this is raw beef. It's the best. I was like, what do you mean? Right? Because like I'm a big fan of sushi. I like my steak medium rare. I was like, what do you? So he tells me all about his raw beef diet, which is all he eats. So he convinces me to go to Berkeley Bowl and buy a cross rib roast, a Neiman Ranch cross rib roast, super high quality beef, and I eat nothing but raw beef for like a week and a half, 2 weeks, until I'm working out one morning and I throw up raw beef.
Oh,
and I was like, I'm out.
That might put an end to it.
Dude, it was so wild. But it's super high quality product,
Yeah.
right? I really appreciated it. And they terminated all those leases under the at least partially under the premise that it's like, we have to care for this land. I'm like, guys, who's mowing the lawn?
Yeah.
Who's mowing the lawn? Who's it like these lands were cared for and consumed by ungulates forever. Like, this is not going to go well.
Yeah, and I find that is always the contention in conservation, is making sure you bring in the voice of someone who maintains that circle. And you get a lot of different agencies, whether it's someone who's worried about the endangered species or someone who's specifically, worried about the anadromous fish population or, preserving the forest.
Right.
And we forget that it's a full circle. And that's kind of the cool thing about the ranchers and producers in this state, is you have to look holistically. You can't just shift one button and hope that it cures all of your problems. And exactly as you said, as a cattle rancher, it's been fantastic for me, swinging back to sustainability kind of on the traditional front of your practices, because, I took over a ranch from my dad. I didn't want to take out a big operating loan, and I'm trying to figure out how to keep my pasture healthy and my hay pastures. And that's why I started talking with some folks that did things a little differently. And I was like, so you're telling me that I can use my cattle as a tool and not buy fertilizer and use them to complete the cycle and really use them even, when it comes to interseeding as a way to terminate a crop that's already been there and all of that cool stuff. And I think that's why our rural communities and our agricultural folks are so critical is when you have your hands in the soil every day, you're invested in meaningful conservation. Not we're going to try and fix this one thing and all the consequence be damned. We need to fix the entire cycle and keep going where we're going.
And if I may, outside of, like, you can make a moral argument. You can also point to all of the old timber areas. It's like, do you want your area, like if the economic driver of your area is ag, do you want that to go away because you built houses all over it? And then look at like Council, Idaho, or other places that all had, mills in them, and they don't now, right?
Yeah.
That you don't have great replacement industry. The other problem is that aside from the industry, the taxes that the county and the services that ag actually delivers to areas is so fundamental. I mean, like you're not going to be able to close that loop on that budget. Like it's going to cost everybody more every single day if the gigantic tax producers, which are ag operations, disappear.
Yeah, ag really does underpin and pay for our rural development. And, the budget is a big thing in Idaho right now, and ag is something huge we depend on. But I think even more than that, it's interesting as you talk about California almost self-sabotaging its own industries. Because the thing that
very
yes,
directly.
Very directly.
Very directly.
You are... It shocked me in California because being in Idaho and you think LA or Bay Area. I lived in the Central Valley, very different part of California, yes. Making so much produce, so much land for cattle, dairies, all of that. And to see them actively eliminating the opportunities for producers in their state, it really is a terrifying concept if we were ever to get there, because I think our memory of COVID is way too short. So during COVID, I was between the ranch and helping my dad while he was going through cancer treatments, and I was working remotely for a dehydrated potato company. So my job during that time was solely to track what ingredients that were not going to come in today were stuck in a port outside of LA, trying to figure out what customers we have to short. Is it going to be Popeyes, Cisco? Is it going to be hospitals through the Cisco brand? And it was such an awakening. And I know you've interviewed Fair Idaho folks before.
Sure.
And it was such a cool awakening to see the Idaho supply chain come alive during that time. And I'm not saying that that's something that we have to have all the time. I do believe being able to feed the world and move our food is great. But there was something really impressive about the way Idaho came together, and we realized we grow a ton of food. We grow a variety of food. We have a very diverse climate between northern Idaho wheat growers all the way down to southern Idaho, where they can still be harvesting corn and other crops well into what I consider winter up in my frozen north. And it was really cool to see folks come together and that we could feed our state. If you have all of these global supply chains shut down, if you can't get something from one side of the coast to another, we had all of the folks to come together in these food producers. And I think that's something so critical that we still need to embrace. I think our memory on that is a little bit short, and we need to think about that if edging ag is part of the conversation.
Yeah, but Tori, listen to me. I agree with you 100%. And the number of conversations I've had with people about tariffs and the problems, I mean, it has all become this gigantic, confusing, international, political, like everybody's an armchair expert. You know what I found out? I think it was like last week or the week before. There was the Dairy West convention at the Grove, and went to it, learned a ton about dairy. It was great. The speakers were fantastic. I had Steve Seppi, who's the CEO of Dairy West, on, followed by Michael Dykes, who's the CEO and president of IDFA, International Dairy Foods Association, followed by Erica Lauder, who works for IDEX, the International Dairy Exporter Council, right? All three of these people, you know what I find out? I found out that like the EU, they export to us something like $3 billion worth of dairy products, cheese, whatever it might be, specialty products. They only import 150 million. It's literally like a 95 to 5%, balance, incredibly lopsided because they're protecting their dairy industry. So you have all of these, you have all kinds of risks, and you have people that are growing potatoes. They're losing money hand over fist right now, and then people start complaining about, like, why are we even growing potatoes here? It's like, guys, like, we need to have localized industry. The fact that we're engaging in tariffs to support localized industry is not a bad thing. And of course, it's the second you bring that up, people are like, oh, Trump just wants everybody to be spending more money. It's like, have you talked to a farmer today? Like, have you talked to a lamb producer? Have you talked to a beef producer? Have you talked to a sugar beet producer? Like, have you talked to anybody related to these industries that can tell you that they've either been getting hammered by the Australian lamb market forever? They're getting abused by, Brazilian sugar. They're getting destroyed by, the dairy industry in the EU. It's like, we are not in a great spot to continue supporting our own industry. And yeah, maybe you could make it buy for like 30 cents cheaper on a certain product. But at the end of the day, if you have a supply chain interruption, you won't be able to supply for yourself. You're going to be in a horrible position when you're actually bargaining with people, because they're like, listen, be nice or we're going to take away all your sugar. And it's like, oh no. Like, these are real considerations that people just don't understand. Like, this is how the world food system works.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And I like to think that my natural inclination is go back to a very libertarian perspective. But when you look at something as critical as food, I do think it's something we need to examine.
But may I ask you, even if you and I said, if we did, libertarian is the best, let it happen, but the rest of the international world doesn't follow. If those markets don't follow, they're like, oh my God, look at what they just did. It's awesome. Yeah. Flood the market. And all of a sudden, sugar bottoms out. We destroy our entire sugar production capacity. We move away from refining it. 2-3 years later, nobody's messing with sugar in the U.S. And then the producer that flooded the market, they tighten the screws. And now we're paying 10x what it was.
Exactly. And I think that's why food has to be, in its own category of discussion. And it also makes it difficult to move into some phases of agriculture I think we need to take. Because when we're just looking at pure, we're just producing whatever's demanded on the world, we're not making the right decisions for the climate we're in, literally, and the changing water situation we're in Idaho. Great example of this is grass-fed beef. Most grass-fed beef comes from outside of the United States. If you go into Whole Foods right now, it's probably,
where's it coming from?
It's Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay.
Really?
There's going to be a lot of that. And what I find disappointing about that is not just that you don't have folks who are selling that, and we have a lot of direct producers who are doing online sales throughout the state, which is awesome. But the big opportunity that I've seen, and I'm lucky enough to have a co-op model that brings in farmers as well, is we can grow grass-fed beef, and we can also support our no-till guys and our farmers who are trying to integrate some no-till, trying to integrate some cover cropping, compensate them for the grazing we receive that helps cover some of these new and what feel like expensive and risky practices that they're being told are great ways to save on water, rebuild their soil. But when you have a banknote that's due, you need a little offset for that. And so it's a really great free market way in that capacity. If you have thriving domestic grass-fed beef, we graze cattle on their cover crops, pay them basically for that grazing. And then they also get the inputs of not only manure that's helping to replace and reduce fertilizer costs, but the actual active and live microbiome of that cattle going back into the microbes in the soil. And so to me, it's such a complicated and intricate thing we lose by one simple thing, like not being able to support American-raised grass-fed beef that's now an input into the way that somebody who's growing sugar beets or corn can now do more sustainable practices. And you can have farmers out in Grandview, Idaho, that is basically, and Bruno, the Bruno sand dunes. There's folks that farm out there and they've adopted no-till and rebuilding their soil because underneath it is a sand dune. And by doing that responsibly, they have some of the most productive land that you could imagine. And it's kind of cool to see them doing that and being able to make a living doing the right thing, as long as you can keep supporting it with other industries and ag.
Okay, I have so many questions, but I'm just going to start with one. Can you explain to me the no-till process and system that leads to benefiting from having, cattle grazing on it? So say I'm like, all right, I'm doing no-till. What does that mean?
So no-till, we probably all thought of conventional tillage. I'm an East Idaho person. I know you have at least one East Idaho listener because they requested more content in your comments. But for us out in East Idaho, we all have the experience of driving north of Idaho Falls and the freeway is shut down because all of the potato ground by Osgood is blowing because that's traditional tillage that's laid fallow.
What does blowing mean?
Blowing across the road, the dust is blowing.
Okay, so it's like a giant dust bowl.
It is.
Visibility of zero.
It's the Idaho form of a haboob.
Haboob. Wait, okay, hang on. Let's back this up. Okay, so I grow potatoes. Okay, I harvest the potatoes, and then once I'm done, because we just passed harvest like a month ago or something, right? Once we're done harvesting, then what happens?
Then, and I am not a potato farmer, but generally, so if you're going between crops, you can go ahead and do intensive tillage. And that's usually like a deeper, like you're taking an actual plow, you're turning over ground, and you're doing that whole process. So it's kind of, if you think of that beautiful, smooth, lines through the dirt, just dirt that's there. That's your traditional tillage. And then you have some steps that are reduced tillage. So you might till in limited strips, you might not go as deep. And then there's a full no-till where you're basically just inserting that seed into the ground. And
so you harvest the crops, everything's a little bumpy.
Yeah.
Then you don't dig, do you smooth it out first?
So it depends on the crop. So crops like a potato or a sugar beet inherently have to be into some kind of limited till.
Okay.
So, but say I did my sugar beets, we dug sugar beets.
Right.
I'm going to go ahead and go in behind that with barley. So barley is great kind of into a no-till system. So once I plant my barley, I'm ready to go into a no-till. So say I harvest my barley, I take off my barley straw, and then I get my neighbor who has a bunch of cattle or some nice dry cows that need a little bit of barley stubble to graze on. They come and graze it.
Because the barley pearls are only on the top, right? So like you grab the top piece, but then the entire stalk, the root system, everything else is there.
So that can either be grazed, turned into straw, and then you can graze off stubble. So a big component of no-till is you need to terminate what was ever there because you want some ground contact for that seed, but you're not turning over soil, you're not disturbing that soil surface. And so cattle are really cool, or sheep, and I will advocate for sheep. I recently got into sheep, even though I live in what is sometimes a very avowed, cattle country. Although everybody likes to mention when I do get sheep, I'll have neighbors that I never knew had them, and they're like, once upon a time, sheep used to save a lot of people when the cattle market went down. But having some kind of grazer come in, you can get that stubble height so low and open up some pockets and do a little more intensive grazing there. And then you can go in typically with what's a no-till drill, and it's basically straight up and down, just poking your seeds in.
And it doesn't matter what else is around. It doesn't matter how smooth it is. It's just...
It does to an extent. Your success rate can kind of vary.
Okay.
So like I said, a barley or a wheat crop is probably much better to go into. And then, if you've left those cattle on there a little longer and allowed them both trampling and that, it opens up a few pockets. But the big key is not turning over that soil. Got it. And there's a lot of thought process around what it's doing is preserving that. Basically, it's kind of interesting to think of when you have your sci-fi, or not sci-fi, but your dystopian stories like The Last of Us, that fungus have a whole network that goes through the soil. Well, there is some truth to that. Like your mycorrhizal fungi and all of your microbiome in your soil is one living, breathing thing that talks to each other.
Wait, The Last of Us? Who was in that?
Oh, I was going to say that's the video game adapted to a show that is basically that the fungus have evolved to inhabit us, and they can talk to each other through this shared network.
Did you probably didn't see this. It was a movie, I think, in the late 70s called Silent Running. Are you familiar?
I'm not.
Trash sci-fi. Okay, so the whole premise,
trash sci-fi.
Dude, check out, if you can find it, Silent Running, okay? But the premise of this movie was that they, Earth had died, right? Like we're all tech people now. And they had taken a bunch of the different ecosystems of Earth and put them into these domes, right? So you have this giant circle with like a rainforest or giant circle with, like Mediterranean, whatever it is. Big dome, and there was this space station that was floating with like 4 of these different, domes. And it's, like floating throughout the solar system, making sure that these places stay, alive. And they get at the beginning of the movie, there's an order that comes down. Like you kind of get assessed. We're like, oh, okay, this is how it's going. And there are these, people that live there and everything. And then the order comes down that they're terminating the program. And one guy's like, wait, we can't do that. This is the last rainforest. And everybody's like, yeah, man, I don't know what to tell you. Like, that's what they told us to do. And then it's very 70s because the intense, like, violent scenes come without music.
Oh,
so
they're
like
just punching sounds.
yeah, and like struggling. You're like, like in Space Odyssey, it was like, yeah, there's some great music, but then there are these other really weird scenes where it's like very quiet, and like people are dying. Anyway, so you have that kind of like conflict, and so one guy, the like rampant environmentalist guy, kills everyone else to save these domes, right? And like he's like killed everyone, and like it was this grand struggle, and the whole point of the movie is like, a couple months later, he's eating like the synthetic food out of the microwave and like he's not tending to the gardens and he's trying to entertain himself. He drives this like weird little go-kart throughout the different environments. But the point is, it's like, what good is having this without people?
Yeah.
Like that's the conservation for like conservation. It's like, you gotta be
Exactly.
people oriented because we are people, right? Like your allegiance should be to the people, but like talk about trash sci-fi. Like it's so
yeah.
out there. And then I don't remember exactly like if he offs himself or
Oh,
what, but
no, I love that though, because you're totally on my path where I
Yeah.
love trash sci-fi because you get those little gleans of like, well, there is this theme and it does make, and you go down the rabbit hole of like, well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of where we
And here we are in 2025, and somebody in the 70s was like, guys, we're going down the wrong path. Like, we can't have conservation and kill off our own
No,
species
no,
to save this thing.
And I think that is actually such a current theme is we think that removing the human element is conservation. And that might be part of the issue with even the word of conservation. I think stewardship is a much better plan.
Right.
It allows for the human element. I mean, that's what we are as stewards. If we think of ourselves that way, if that's how we treat our grounds, I think we're going to have a much better future than just trying to preserve what is, because nature doesn't stay stationary. You need some input and you need care.
Right. And can we just stop hate, like the self-loathing is so wild. You know what's interesting too? You mentioned one of your additional dads. It was like this cowboy guy, right? And you're like, and he's not, like, oh, freedom. There is this sentiment. I had Paul Arrington, the president or executive director of Water Users, on recently. We were talking about ditches and ditch law in Idaho, and you have these problems with easements, right? Because the ditch has existed. Somebody builds, a community around the ditch. The ditch has easement rights. They don't own the property. Like if your backyard backs up to like a ditch or a canal or something, they don't own your property, but they do have a right to transport themselves, maintain the property, whatever it might be, right? And you have people that move here that do not understand that at all. And there's like, they don't need notification. The existence of the canal or ditch is the legal notification that there is some kind of easement. And they get into these huge wrangles. They're like, Idaho values property rights. Idaho believes in property rights. Like, this is a violation of my property right. It's like, okay, first off, you got here 20 minutes ago, so don't lecture me about like what Idaho values. Second, yes, we do believe in freedom and property rights, but we also believe in continuing our agricultural way of life. And this is part of it. And it was written into the agreement that allowed this development to come into existence. So like, get a book, like listen to a show, educate yourself about what your rights are and what they aren't, and integrate properly. Don't come here with some idea of like, I'm going to show these guys what freedom's like. It's like, what are you doing?
Yeah, and it is so difficult because I think we can hold two things valuable. We
Yeah.
value our independence, but especially if I look back at my grandpa's generation, a lot of that freedom came through very strong community ties and support for folks. You had to make big decisions on what you wanted your future to look like for your grandchildren. I run on a cattle association on BLM and Forest, and that's where my cattle go in the summer, and I run with other ranchers. And we typically think, if you have a cattle association running on public lands, that was probably something developed with the government. Well, it preceded there was the Taylor Grazing Act, but it precedes a lot of what developed what we know as public grazing. It was a reaction to the fact that, hey, we're all running out on the Morgan Creek Prairie Basin allotment. We depend on it to raise cattle both for our own consumption and to take for sale. And if we treat it like crap and we just let somebody run roughshod over the rest of us because of their independence, we're not going to have fat cattle because we're going to ruin the resource and we're not going to have good grass. And so the association actually formed voluntarily to help one another in the endeavor of herding all those cattle over a vast landscape, and then also to keep each other in check. Like, let's not overgraze here, let's not overuse a resource, let's develop it so it's most useful. And I think that, to me, that's the essential Idaho is, yes, we are independent, but we're responsible.
I feel like that sentiment of, you know, there's just a nearsighted ignorance that I find with people. Look, I've never run cattle. Okay. So I can't tell you, I'm like, oh yeah, like this is how I do it. What I can tell you is, like, I do jujitsu. I do jujitsu a lot. And I go to places, a wide variety of places to train because I very much enjoy it. And I've been a black belt for a long time. And it's like my left arm, it's part of me. And I never hesitate from popping up when everybody's done and mopping the mats. Now that is classically something reserved for like a white belt. For it's like the guy who's like trying to learn. It's like, of course I'm going to do this because this is what allows me to continue. If you don't take care of the mats, they get broken down and then you can't train anymore. If you don't take care of them, people will get sick and you won't have training partners. Like, you have to take care of the ground on which you practice your art. And that's the mats. And again, that's in my mind real wisdom with care of a school, a jiu-jitsu school that you go to. And I have to imagine it's the same thing. Like, I've never been around like young cowboys, but I'm sure there's some people that, maybe want to cut corners at times, and it's like, listen, man, that's not the way this works if we want to be doing this in 40 years.
Yeah, completely. That's probably my favorite part. At 34, I don't feel that young anymore, but serving on your soil conservation districts will make you feel that way when the average age is probably in their 60s, like most agricultural producers. But I really value time with those folks because it is so cool to see somebody that has dedicated so much of their life and is now looking back. And the emphasis that you see in a lot of these older agricultural producers and board members and even our district employees that work in conservation, and outside of that community, my neighbors that look back of, what I had as a kid, what my kids had, what I want my grandkids to have, and what I want that next generation. It's just like you said, it's taking care of that mat. That ground is going to be there for everyone, and so passing that on to the next generation is they're so generous with their thoughts and their time and their experience, and we're kind of at that point where, like I said, I used to be the youngest person in the room when I was 27 and working in this, and then I was still the youngest person when I turned 30, and now I'm 34. And we need to use that wisdom and be reactive now and really take care of this land and kind of our foundation while we have these folks to inform it.
Yeah. How often are you here?
In Boise?
Yes. Not that often.
Because of my involvement with soil conservation districts, this is kind of going to be the season when I'm back, is during legislative session. My brother does actually live in Boise, so I do make it down. But I have found that, when allowed to return to the ranch, I revert to hermit mode. So I'm either on the ranch or I'm here. So,
dude, I have such a so I don't actually have a ranch, but I do have the ranch.
Oh yeah.
I never leave those. I don't like big gatherings or big groups. It's like, I'd much rather just be hanging out with somebody drinking coffee, like having a conversation. It's like, this is great. The reason I ask is because I really want to talk to you about specific soil conservation and what soil conservation districts are, how they function. But I don't want to dive down this rabbit hole that's like a whole nother thing. I think we've done 45 minutes. When are you back next? Because I'm here all legislative session.
Yeah, I'll be back. I think we do. I'll get you some dates.
Get me some dates. I would love to have you back on.
January for sure. And then
Perfect.
we usually hit agriculture committee hearings and come back. And
Perfect.
I was elected president of IASCD, so I'm sure I will be back more than I have in the past. Tori,
come on. Just anytime you're in town, even if you send me a text that day, just say hey, I'm here. I will find a time to have you back in, because again, I really enjoy this, and this is, again, talking about just educating people about where they're coming from. One of the reasons I've been thinking about the canal problem, right? It's like, why is it that somebody might move here and not give two squats about the canal. And it's because there is no tie to that thing.
Well, no. If you're not told why it's important and the value of it, I understand that.
No, even if you're told why it's important, if you don't
have to have a connection.
if you're like, okay, well, these are the rules, let's change the rules, which is what people try to do. It's like, no, you don't want to do that.
No. Like, and yeah, I totally agree. And soil conservation districts in particular, we struggle with that as well. We'll be going into a legislative session, and it's kind of the thing that I reflected on is it's really terrible when you go in to talk to your legislators or the folks that are in decision-making positions, and their reaction isn't even to argue the value you're arguing for. It's like, oh, we didn't know you existed.
No.
I was like, that.
These are things we need to fix.
Yes. Yeah.
We're on the same page. Tori, thank you for making the time today. Again, my apologies for getting here late. I'm really excited about this. I really hope we can line up a couple more conversations at least. And obviously the or the ledge session, you never know what's coming down the pipe.
Yeah, could be very exciting.
Could be wild. Thank you for coming on. We'll do it again.
All right. Thanks so much, Matt.